Welcome to the 6th grade podcast. This is Mr. Gornto. I'm joined by Ms. Canario and Ms. Brown today. We're going to talk about cycles in nature. The main thing to remember about cycles have steps. They don't have necessarily a beginning or an end. They just are continual in going through. So when we look at these steps, know that these steps are steps that you need to know and understand, but it's not necessarily a first, second, third type of thing, but it is steps that are going to just repeat and continue and go on and on and on.
All right, we're going to start with the water cycle. The water cycle is pretty simple to remember. There are 6 main steps. Just like Mr. Gornto said, there is no start, there is no end. It's just a continuation of the process in the water cycle. But let's say, for instance, that we start with accumulation. Accumulation is just where we have the bodies of water. It's collecting the water, and it forms lakes, it forms oceans. Any accumulation, that's just a body of water. From there, we have evaporation. Evaporation is where the water evaporates into the sky. It goes into the gas. From there, evaporation goes up and it forms condensation. When it hits that upper atmosphere, that weather cools down, that gas collects, it hits the colder air, it forms into liquid, and then that's where we get our precipitation. From precipitation, we have 2 types of runoff. Remember, runoff is just one step, but there are 2 types of runoff. We have surface runoff, and surface runoff, that's just when it hits the ground, and it simply will not go into the ground, but run along the top of the ground. We have subsurface runoff. That is where the water or the precipitation actually goes into the ground, and it runs through the ground. Remember, there are 4 main types of precipitation: rain, snow, sleet, and hail. So don't forget that. All right, don't forget about transpiration. Transpiration is very similar to evaporation. The difference between transpiration and evaporation is transpiration, we've got the trees that the liquid is coming off of, and with evaporation, it's coming from that accumulation from that body of water. But transpiration and evaporation, they both go up. They're gas. They go up into the atmosphere and form our condensation where the clouds form.
I'm going to talk to you about the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is something that every organism needs to help build protein and DNA for new cells. It's absolutely essential for life. The nitrogen, although there's 78% of the Earth's atmosphere is nitrogen, it's in a form that we cannot use. So there's actually bacteria in the ground that perform a process called nitrogen fixation. The bacteria in the ground change the nitrogen in a form that plants can use. Plants then pull it up, use it, and then we get our nitrogen from either eating plants or eating animals that eat plants. Another way that nitrogen fixation occurs is through lightning. Lightning can perform it. Other than that, there's no way to use this nitrogen. So even though there's 78% of it within Earth's atmosphere, it has to be changed to be able to be used.
Okay, so the last cycle we're going to talk about today is the carbon cycle. And the big thing about the carbon cycle is just to watch the transformation of how carbon itself moves through the ecosystem. So the main thing that we normally think about when we think about carbon is the carbon dioxide in the air. So the carbon dioxide in the air will be pulled into plants and used as the process of photosynthesis. That carbon dioxide from the air is changed into carbon that is used to make sugar. You know, in photosynthesis, the product of photosynthesis is sugar. So now we've got the carbon here in the plants right here. So then the sugar from those plants with carbon in it is eaten by the animals. Now the carbon will be eaten by the animals, which is the sugar, and then the animals will change that sugar, the carbon in the sugar, back into carbon dioxide through a process called respiration. So we breathe out the carbon through that we took in from the sugar from the plants. Now all living things are primarily made out of water and carbon. So when this little deer here dies, okay, his body will be decomposed, and the carbon that makes up his body will be put back into the soil and the rock through the process of decomposition. So the carbon that is in the living things that is decomposed, sometimes it's there for a very long time. sometimes that carbon can be changed into fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are full of carbon, and when they are burned, like when we take coal or gasoline and we burn them to use them, the carbon within those fossil fuels through the process of combustion comes back out into the air as carbon dioxide. So that is how carbon is moved throughout the ecosystem. Carbon dioxide in the air into plants through photosynthesis, the sugar into animals from eating it, the carbon back into the air through the animals' breathing of respiration. When biotic things die, they go into the soil and are decomposed. So the carbon is in the soil, and sometimes that carbon in the soil is there long enough to create fossil fuels, which the carbon is then released into the air by combustion, and we start all over again. So again, the three cycles that are most important to our ecosystems are the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the carbon cycle, and all three of those cycles show how that particular material is transferred throughout the ecosystem.